Hey guys, what's going on? It's Ben here. I'm back again today doing another video, and the subject of today's video is going to be on crazy NBA trades that almost happened but didn't, but I think are super interesting to look back on. Been meaning to make this video for a while, just getting around to it now. I remember reading an article I heard in an interview a little while back, Garnett talking about where he wanted to go as far as trades when he was going to be leaving Minnesota. And he talked about some crazy scenarios that I just wanted to go over here, along with some other ones that I dug up afterwards after looking around and being interested in them. So let's just get into it. So I'm going to cover the Garnett ones first just because those were the first ones that came up, but I have the years next to when each of these potential deals was floated. Just put them all on screen at the beginning so you can kind of look them over for yourself and we can talk through them. Garnett to Los Angeles in 2007, so he wanted to go to the Lakers, but McHale wasn't really wanting to send him there because they were the rival, and he was going to want to send them to Danny Ainge because that's his friend and former teammate, and so that's a big part of why he didn't go to Los Angeles. But the supposed offer was Bynum and Odom for Garnett, and Bynum, at this point was pretty young, still averaging like 12 points per game. Odom was like averaging 16 and a pretty good player, and honestly, yes, this was far better than the package that they got for him, which is basically Al Jefferson and trash, but still like not a very fair trade in my opinion. I guess they were expecting Bynum to ascend to an all-star status like he did, but then be a consistent all-star afterwards. So from that perspective, it made sense, but besides that, he wasn't that great of a player, I guess. Besides that, you have Kevin Garnett going to Phoenix in 2007. Again, same thing. They were thinking of flipping Garnett to Phoenix for Stoudemire, but the Suns said that Stoudemire was too good to just straight up trade him for Garnett, as Garnett at the time was like 31 or 32, and Stoudemire was like right in his prime at like 24 or 25, I think. And so they didn't really think it was an even trade, considering also at the time that Stoudemire was putting up like 26 and 12 and was like pretty close as far as skill level to Garnett, but just like 6 years younger. It wasn't really worth it to them. So those are the interesting Garnett ones in my opinion. Besides that, we have Shaq in 2004 when the Lakers were looking into trading him. An alternative that Mark Cuban talked about was that he was trying to get Shaq to go to Dallas, and the package was supposedly going to be Josh Howard, Devin Harris, Eric Dampier, Michael Finley, and a bunch of draft picks. Honestly, I think this would have been a pretty similar package to what they sent, or what Miami sent too. Like Miami sent Caron Butler and Lamar Odom, and that was basically it. And then they traded Butler a year later for Kwame Brown. So basically what the Lakers got for Shaq was Kwame Brown and Lamar Odom, which was a pretty terrible package. So I think in retrospect, this would have been better. Josh Howard was probably pretty similar to Lamar Odom in skill level. Devin Harris would have been better than Kwame Brown, and Michael Finley would have been a decent player to have in his later years. It's kind of like they would have been better for that 2004 to 7 era when Kobe was on his own and losing in the first round or missing the playoffs, but like in the long run, this trade would have probably ended similarly, that like maybe one of these guys stays on the Lakers in the long haul, but the rest don't really. Dallas would have gotten a lot better, though. Their core now would have been like Jason Terry and Shaq, and who knows if they keep Nash, if they're able to pull this deal off. They probably aren't able to keep him, but it would have been really cool to see to see Shaquille O'Neal and Dirk play together. Besides that, Allen Iverson in 1999, they were considering trading him to the Lakers for Glenn Rice. And this might seem ridiculous, but at the time, Iverson was like a really big headache for Philly, and he was still in some legal trouble kind of stuff, and the NBA really wasn't happy with him, so they were debating. Like, he was always flirting with like suspension and getting in a lot of trouble, so from that perspective, Philly was at a point where they were like, maybe we just don't want to deal with him anymore. And so Glenn Rice on the Lakers this year was still like a pretty good player, like putting up like 18-ish points per game. And, towards the latter half of his prime, and yes, he wasn't worth Iverson, but this was a kind of thing. This was very similar to like Kawhi going to the Raptors for DeMar DeRozan. It was like Kawhi is clearly a lot better than DeRozan, but DeRozan was still like an all-star caliber player, so it wasn't like a terrible return, but that's exactly what this sort of thing would have been. Glenn Rice wouldn't have been equal in value to Iverson, but he still is like an all-star, sort of an all-star caliber player, so it would have kind of been worth it. He was going to fall off really quickly after this, so it's good that they did not do the trade, but obviously the big result of this that everybody always thinks about is what if you had Iverson, Kobe, and Shaq on the same team? It probably would have worked decent. I actually don't think it would have been like the best thing ever because you'd have a lot of dudes who want to touch the ball, and I just don't know. Like Iverson and Kobe, that backcourt would have been a really ball hoggy. They would have really wanted to take like you'd have three dudes each wanting to take 20 shots a game, and that's just a recipe for people to get upset with each other. So I think they would have still won the championships, but I think that the team would have split up like a year earlier, probably like 03 rather than 04. But you could also go in the other direction and say if they had Iverson, then when Shaq got injured in 03 and they were a worse team, they wouldn't have fallen off as much because they would have had Iverson to kind of supplement that. But it's really about, it's hard to know, but I think they would have pretty much had the same levels of success, like 3 chips before they all got sick of each other. 2010, we had the infamous Amari Stoudemire rejected trade in that Amari Stoudemire almost went to Cleveland for Ilgauskas and J.J. Hickson, but the Cleveland Cavaliers didn't want to give up J.J. because they thought he was too young, and if Amari Stoudemire and LeBron left after this season, they wanted to retain a young core piece. And so they basically weren't willing to give up J.J. Hickson for Amari Stoudemire. But you think if they would have acquired Stoudemire, they maybe get to the finals, and they probably have a way better shot of retaining LeBron than otherwise. But they just weren't willing to do it, and instead they only ended up getting Antoine Jamison, and he was just not nearly the player that Stoudemire was at the time, who, to remind you, was putting up like 25 and 11 points per game. So yeah, that was really a terrible move by Cleveland and set them back for years until LeBron decided to return out of pity. Next, we have McGrady to Philly for Larry Hughes. Philly was wheeling and dealing in this year. If you go up to that Iverson trade too, they were also looking at shipping out Larry Hughes for McGrady, but I think Toronto wasn't willing to do this because they thought that McGrady had more potential. It was kind of like Larry Hughes in the moment was the better player, like putting up more points and stuff, but McGrady was seen as having way more potential like down the road, so they didn't do it. But it was an idea that was flirted when McGrady was kind of coming into his own a bit more, and him and Vince didn't want to necessarily share the spotlight as much. They were thinking of trading him away. And this would have been interesting in that we would have gotten an Iverson-McGrady pairing, which would have set them up way better to be a dominant force in the NBA going forward. But it just didn't happen that way. And then finally, the next one that I wanted to talk about was the potential of Kyrie Irving going to Phoenix, and Phoenix sending Josh Jackson to Indiana and sending Bledsoe to Cleveland, and then Indiana sending Paul George to Cleveland. This is the potential trade that fell through for Kyrie Irving that almost happened. But the reason that it didn't is Dan Gilbert said he'd only do this trade if LeBron signed an extension right then and there to be in Cleveland long term, which he didn't. But you look back at this trade, Phoenix would have come out on top. Besides that, Cleveland comes out way on top. Paul George and Bledsoe for Kyrie is great value. The team that loses big time is Indiana, and it's a good thing that this trade didn't happen for them. Josh Jackson at the time was seen as sort of like a next Kawhi Leonard type, and he definitely wasn't that. But because he had that hype around him, Indy was willing to trade Paul George for just the 3rd overall pick, which they were going to take Josh Jackson at. So they better be happy that this trade didn't happen, because if it did, it would have set their franchise way back compared to what they got a year later for Paul George, or later in the off season for Paul George, which was Oladipo and Sabonis, 2 future All-Stars. There you have it, guys. Those are some of the most interesting trades that almost happened in NBA history. I didn't include the ones that everybody knows, like Chris Paul to the Lakers, or some of the other famous ones, or like what if Tim Duncan would have come to Orlando with Grant Hill and Tracy McGrady, stuff like that. I didn't want to include those. I wanted to include the ones that really don't ever get talked about. I like another one I thought about throwing on here, but I ultimately didn't, was the whole Kobe Bryant to Detroit in 2007. Maybe that's one I can just talk about quickly. Kobe was really unhappy and he wanted to be traded to either Detroit or to Chicago, and he didn't go to Chicago because the Lakers were demanding Luol Deng back, and he didn't want that, so that fell through. And then if it was to Detroit, it would have been for like Rip Hamilton, Tayshaun Prince, and a bunch of draft picks, which apparently was close to happening, but then Jerry Buss sat down with Kobe and was like, I'm not trading you no matter what, so you better get over it. But yeah, I wanted to cover some of the more interesting, obscure ones rather than the ones we always hear about. So hope you guys enjoyed the video. Hope you have a good day, and I'll see you next time. Bye.